Guess what, Lions? For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to exclusive bonus audio content and help this program grow by joining the Lions of Liberty Pride. To learn more, head over to lionsofliberty.com/support.
But I fit in quite well, and one of them said, do you fancy having a go at buying some crack? Which I thought was quite an odd sort of question.
Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, it is time for another edition of Felony Friday, right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Now, of course, Felony Friday is a weekly show that focuses on exposing injustice in the broken criminal justice system. This is the 75th episode of Felony Friday, so that means you'll be able to find the show notes page for this episode at lionsofliberty.com/ff75. This week's episode of Felony Friday with Neil Woods. This is a really important interview for a couple reasons. Neil is a great voice for speaking about the troubles of the drug war, and especially pointing out, because he's experienced it firsthand as an undercover detective, the violence that is created by a prohibition. So this is a great interview. I really had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Today, my guest on Felony Friday is Neil Woods. Neil is a former undercover drugs detective sergeant and is the chairman of LEAP UK. For 14 years, Neil risked his life as a drug squad police officer, posing undercover as a heroin and crack addict. Over the years, Neil came to realize that his work and drug prohibition as a whole actually made the drug trade more dangerous. So now he's working as an activist trying to reform and eliminate drug prohibition. Neil, welcome to Felony Friday.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on the show, Neil. And we have had some of your counterparts on from the U.S. branch of LEAP, talking about ways to end drug prohibition, some of the pitfalls of prohibiting drugs. And I want to get into that with you today. I want to talk about your background as an undercover detective. I think that's going to be really interesting to hear about some of those stories. I read your interview in The Independent, which I found fascinating. But before we get into that, before we go down that road, just for the benefit of my listeners to learn a little bit more about you, what attracted you in the first place to pursuing a career in law enforcement?
Well, I was literally flippant with that. I dropped out of university and I saw an advertisement for the police. Now, I had planned to go backpacking around Europe like lots of 19-year-olds do over here. So I thought, no, but police sounds interesting. It's going to be different every day. So I flipped a coin and it came up heads. And so that's taken me on the journey that's brought me here. So I was literally flippant. But having said that, once I went into the police, I wanted to do the right thing. I was very much had a young man's idealist view about doing the right thing, catching bad guys, that kind of thing.
Well, that's a first. That's the first I've heard for a reason to, I guess, to do any career path from any of my guests. But that's unique. I like it. It's black or white, one or the other. There's no in between. So once you became a police officer and you said you were going into this, you were an idealist, thought you could really change the system or do good things. How did you first get started in undercover work? Was that something that you seeked out, or did you kind of stumble into that as well?
Well, it was in 1993, and I'd been in the job about 4 years, and I was fortunate enough to get an attachment to the drug squad. Now, they hated having us rookie attachments. We just got underfoot. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were sort of foisted upon them. But I fit in quite well, and one of them said, do you fancy having a go at buying some crack? Which I thought was quite an odd sort of question. But I had a go, and he pointed me to this door in Derby, which is a Midland city. And I knocked on this door, and this huge gangster answered the door. And after a bit of questioning, a bit of to and fro-in, he sold me this £20 stone of crack cocaine. And that sort of defined the next 14 years of my life, really, because up until that point, and I know this kind of undercover work had been going on in the States, I know, but it hadn't been going on at all in the UK. And there was suddenly a lot of pressure from the Home Office, from the government, to do something about crack cocaine. It was a big moral panic, And I remember at school the Nancy Reagan on the TV saying, "One smoke of this evil drug and you're addicted for life." So I fell for all that sort of rhetoric. So I wholeheartely went into it, and to start with, it wasn't actually that difficult.
So initially, you said that they just kind of asked you, do you want to go buy some crack? Was there any sort of training? Did they? I guess you didn't get to watch anybody in action doing this first. They just kind of threw you in the fire, so to speak.
Yeah, no, there was no training at all. In fact, a few years later, I helped devise the training nationally in the UK, having had the benefit of making plenty of mistakes myself to help teach people with. But no, there was no training, and this kind of work didn't really go on in the UK at all. So. And it went from a few days, then a few weeks, and then I was doing 6 months at a time operations. So sort of spending, a good 6 months in an inner city, buying off all the low level and then climbing up the ladder to buy bigger and bigger weights off sort of regional players.
So when you're going undercover, you're basically going into a character, I would imagine. You're acting a lot different than you would in your daily life. Was that difficult to go back and forth between the two, working as an undercover agent and then switching back and maybe spending time with family and friends?
Yeah, it was very difficult to juggle sometimes. But I still managed to get home most weekends and take my kids swimming on a Sunday morning and have that kind of life. But yeah, there was several times when I was away for, say, 3 nights at a time and working very long hours, and sometimes there'd be some really intense things happening as well. But for the most part, family life I managed, I think.
So you're talking about some intense scenarios, and I know you shared a couple in that article that I read in the Independent. Could you share one that comes to mind now? One of those intense, maybe scary situations that you got yourself in working undercover?
Well, yeah, there was an operation where I was working in Nottingham. I think this was about 2003, something like that. And at the time, there was an enormous amount of gun crime in Nottingham. In fact, the newspaper headlines called it Shottingham, which was an interesting pun, I thought. But that basically, there was lots of gun crime, and most of it was down to a particular gang, cartel, if you like, run by this guy called Colin Gunn. And you can look him up. He was a pretty maniacal type of person. And so there was lots of pressure for me to get intelligence. Now, it took me about 4.5 months to get introduced to one of this guy's lieutenants. And when I finally met him and I got introduced, he held this knife to my groin for about 15 minutes, and I could feel it pressing against my, where you really don't want to feel a knife, for about 15 minutes while he interrogated me. And eventually he sold to me some weights, and but then the next day, this will probably interest listeners. The next day, some of my crew, my backup team, were off sick, so we had to get someone else that I didn't know. And so they introduced them the next morning, these 2 backup crew. One of them I was happy with, and then the next person I really, really took an instant dislike to. The hairs on the back of my neck went up. Now, when you've been working undercover in some serious danger and you've had a knife pressed against your groin, and your senses are fairly alert, you're fairly tuned into dangers, perhaps verging on paranoia even. And so I took a dislike to this guy, and I went to the SIO, the officer running the operation, and I said, "Boss, I can't have this guy in the briefing. I can't have this guy knowing what I'm doing." So he said, "Fine, we'll exclude them both so they don't ask any questions." Anyway, 12 months, my job led on to another operation, which eventually led to the whole Colin Gunn empire being brought down. And it turned out that this police officer that I'd taken a dislike to was an employee of Colin Gunn. He'd actually been paid to join the police 7 years before. He was paid £2,000 on top of his police wage, plus bonuses for good information. And at the time, Colin Gunn was putting it out that if he caught an undercover cop, he'd have been tortured to death. So that was quite a close shave, really. And these kind of things were going on, all the time. So yeah, there were some tense moments, and it was very good sometimes to get home and unwind with family. Definitely.
So he was, I guess you would call him a reverse informant. He was an informant for the drug cartels, for the gangs.
Yeah, precisely. And in the debrief for that, when we discussed this issue afterwards with the senior covert police in the country, the attitude universally was, well, yeah, we shouldn't be surprised. Of course, we know this is happening. With this much money involved, how can this not happen? So it's completely accepted by all of the senior police in the UK that there are spies in our ranks due to the enormous amounts of money involved in the drug trade. So the drug trade is corrupting our entire system, and the public, are blissfully unaware of this because it's not universally known, and I think people should know this.
Yeah, that's something I've heard you talk about before in interviews. How the more resources that law enforcement is pouring into preventing the drug trade, actually the more violent it gets, and the more the more informants that are used, the more tactics that the gangs will use to interrogate these people and make the entire situation more dangerous for even people just working in the drug trade. And I know that's true in the United States as well. So can you just provide some backdrop and some analysis as to why you believe that is?
Well, yeah, I mean, that sort of leads me on to the reason that I finally came to the conclusions that I did. I mean, very early on in my undercover career, I realised that the war on drugs couldn't be won. And yet I still carried on doing the work because I'm a cop, and I just want to catch bad guys. I mean, you're catching drug-dealing gangsters, you're catching some of the worst people, aren't you? Because that's the way our communities work. But I remember being tempted into another job. I'd had enough, but I was tempted into a job in Northampton. And it was sold to me like this. The undercover people that I used to work for said, Woodsy, we need you to do this job because these gangsters are even more vicious than the last ones. These guys are actually raping people for drug debts. They are incredibly vicious. Now, this was a team of gangsters called the Burger Bar Boys. And they were moving from Birmingham to take over the control of neighbouring towns and cities. As always happens with the drug trade, monopolies form. And so I got involved. I took months and months to get an introduction to these people. Eventually, I bought off them all, got evidence of conspiracy. They all got 10 years. But some of the violence and some of the behaviours, it became eventually clear to me. The penny dropped that the reason these gangsters were getting more and more vicious was actually down to me. Or rather, not just me, but people like me. Because if you remember at the start, I said, actually, the first time I bought this crack cocaine in Derby, there's a few questions, but it wasn't that difficult. The Burger Bar Boys, when I did that job, they stripped me naked in a park in daylight at gunpoint to see if I had a wire. They were raping people, they were beating people, they were literally running a reign of terror. And the reason that they did that is because of police tactics. Because every time police use a drugs informant, or they successfully use undercover police officers, they cause the logical next step for organised crime. Because the most successful gangsters are the ones who can most successfully terrify a community. So if you're an informant in a police cell and you're looking at 5 years in prison and you want to get a discount in your sentence, I don't know if that happens over there, you're sitting there thinking, who am I least scared of to grass up? So the scariest gangsters are the ones who survive. If you're an undercover police officer, if a gangster has threatened an entire community saying, if you introduce an undercover police officer to anyone connected with me, you'll be tortured to death. Then again, the most successful gangsters are the most violent, and it's a sort of urban Darwinian soup created by policing drugs. And there is no end to it because it's an arms race with no chance of de-escalation. There's no chance of a peace treaty. The only way to win this war is to declare peace.
So this kind of leads me to my next question. And I know the environment in the United States has been slowly changing. It seems like, well, at least obviously with marijuana, there's been several U.S. states that have legalized recreational marijuana. But there's still the majority of the population is very hesitant, very afraid to legalize these harder drugs, heroin and crack cocaine. When it's pretty evident, I don't think people understand it to the degree that you just explained it, but I think it's pretty logical that prohibiting a drug makes it more dangerous, makes the transacting that drug makes it more dangerous, makes it more dangerous for the users of those drugs to find a dose that is not going to kill them, not going to be mixed with some dose of fentanyl or something else that they can't handle and they end up dead in a motel somewhere. So why do you think it is that the police and politicians in all of our countries have been able to really pull the wool over the citizens' eyes and make it so that it can't be understood that actually prohibition is making things worse when it's so evident that it is making things worse?
How have they managed to pull the wool over our eyes? Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because there's a circular situation happens with the media and the public and politicians. A moral panic is created, which is exploited by politicians in order to win votes or seem tough. This, in turn, creates propaganda and misinformation, which the public latch onto and sort of pours fuel on a fire for the next moral panic. It's a cyclic situation that we need to break down with common sense and evidence. So the answer is to insist our politicians follow an evidence-based policy, I think. I mean, you talk about the drug deaths. There's an epidemic of drug deaths in North America, and there is no excuse for not responding to that medically. There is no excuse at all because medical responses will save lives, and yet politicians insist on suggesting that there is punitive response that'll work, and it's baffling how history can be so blatantly and brutally ignored. Really,
it really is. So, what's the current situation in the UK? Just to give my audience a little bit of background, are you seeing in the UK the same sort of heroin epidemic, opioid epidemic in the streets? Are you seeing mass overdoses, or is it lesser than compared to what's going on right now in North America?
At the moment, it's significantly less than America, but it's still dramatic. In fact, it's record-breakingly dramatic here because we now have drug deaths which are higher than road deaths for the first time in the last 12 months. So it's horrific and it's really bad. It isn't quite as bad in terms of heroin deaths at the moment in America. But unfortunately, in only the last few weeks, we have suddenly had fentanyl turn up in some of our heroin samples right across the UK. So it looks like we may be catching up on that particular insipid danger. So I do hope that some positive moves that we've been having here actually take fruit, which have been very interesting actually, because just a few years ago in the UK, I was very against the idea of politicisation of police because we had this new system brought in called police and crime commissioners. Now, I know you vote in sheriffs and mayors and things over there, don't you?
Yes.
But here it's a very new thing for us, and I wasn't in favour in the slightest. But what's happened is we have some police and crime commissioners who have been voted in who are actually making more drastic political moves than any of the politicians. Mm-hmm. We have a police and crime commissioner here called Ron Hogg, who is actually using part of the policing budget to bring in heroin-assisted treatment. So he's forcing the issue, which is a very exciting thing because the evidence will, of course, be clear and lives will be saved in County Durham. So we have some interesting things here, and it is the police which are bringing them in.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting you bring that up. Someone that I interviewed a few episodes ago on this show, Dominic Izzo, he's a former cop in the Chicago area. And what he did is he challenged his police chief. His police chief was using a point system to direct his policing resources to just go after certain types of crime, more revenue-generating crimes, more drug crime. And he spoke out against that and eventually was terminated. But now he is running for sheriff of the entire county. And the election's not till next year. But it's interesting times right now because with social media and these different platforms we have, he does a lot of videos from his car and more casual situations. It's easy to relate to the everyday people. And he breaks down the things that we're breaking down today, the problems with the drug war. So I think that hurdle has been broken down. It's easier for people who want to initiate change to actually get that platform, maybe get elected to one of those more political seats and make change, where in the past, the only way to get a seat by that was through being friends with the right people, maybe taking bribes from the right people. So I think maybe social media is actually helping us in this regard, which is pretty interesting. I wanted to backtrack for just a moment to talk about, you talked about that very early on in your police career, you came to understand that really the work you were doing was not actually, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so feel free to correct me, was not actually helping, or maybe helping to the extent that you thought it would. So you continued to work for a while after that. How did you move to get out of the police force? How did that take place?
Well, I mean, the conclusions I'd come to from undercover work were reinforced by certain observations I made. I mean, over the time I worked undercover, I put people in prison for over 1,000 years in the UK. Now, we don't send people to prison for as long as you do over there in the United States. So 1,000 years is a lot over here. But I only ever interrupted the heroin and crack cocaine flow in any city for around 2 hours, and police intelligence showed that clearly. So I realised with those kind of conclusions that I had to do something about it. So I stayed in the police for a while after I came to that conclusion, because I was trying to sort of persuade people from the inside, really. I became an accredited drugs expert, sort of very vocal national expert on the topic. But eventually, PTSD hit me for a variety of reasons, probably not least of which for a variety of near-death experiences from undercover work. But also there's a form of PTSD, I don't know if you hear about it over there, that's called moral damage. Because basically my PTSD presented itself by intensely anxious memories where I couldn't exist outside the memory. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything because I was just existing in this sort of repeating memory. But it wasn't the knife to my groin or being stripped naked at gunpoint. It wasn't the time I was almost run over with a car, or the time I had a samurai sword to my throat. It wasn't any of those things that were causing these memories. It was actually the vulnerable people that I'd manipulated and made their lives far, far worse than if they hadn't met me. Because I caused enormous harm to an enormous amount of people. But at the time that I was doing it, to me, the end justified the means, because I was seeing it as collateral damage in order to catch some really nasty people. But, once you come to the conclusion that there's always more nasty people coming along, there's always going to be more violent gangsters because of the actions you're doing, and suddenly the end doesn't justify the means. So it was PTSD really that realised I had to change tack. I had to, with the perception that I have, with the experience that I have and the conclusions that I've come to, I think I was duty bound to do something about it, and actually being positive, becoming a campaigner, and becoming very vocal about it. That is what's helped me on the way to health. And you need to be feeling like you're doing something about it, I think.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. Since leaving the police force, since leaving this role as an undercover officer, what sort of reaction have you received from your law enforcement colleagues?
Oh, well, that's interesting, because when I first came out, when I first did my first piece in a Vice article, I was public enemy number one to the covert policing world, because I was quite well known within the undercover world. Obviously, I did a lot of training and developing the tactics. A colleague of mine who was a close friend was called into a senior officer's office and given a lawful order. I don't know if you had that in the police over there. Lawful order means you have to do what you're told, otherwise you're going to be disciplined. and she was told to delete me from her phone, Facebook, social media, and that if she ever spoke to me again while she was a serving police officer, she'd be disciplined. So that was the kind of environment, the kind of sort of knockback people had who would even have anything to do with me. Then I published my book, Good Cop, Bad War, and there's a lot of cops have read it, and I've had an incredible amount of support, overwhelming support. And actually, Leap UK has grown massively. There's several other undercover cops have come forward, some I know and lots that I didn't know. Lots of police investigators from all walks of life have contacted us and offered us support and help. So it's been overwhelming, really, and it's very encouraging, and we are really on a wave of expansion. So in the next few months, we'll be making some interesting announcements here in the UK.
Well, that is good news, and I think the same thing is happening in the United States. I think that the LEAP organization over here is growing as well, and from everyone I've talked to who's in the organization, for the most part, they continue to receive a more favorable reaction over time when they come out and speak against the unintended consequences of drug prohibition. Now, I want to kind of shift and talk about the future, going forward, some solutions instead of drug prohibition. So I talked about a couple states in the U.S. that have legalized recreational marijuana. We're familiar with Portugal's decriminalization of all drugs. I know that Switzerland and Canada have some forms of prescription heroin in place to help addicts get off of that drug. And I think Switzerland's has been around, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think since the 90s, and they've never had an overdose. Been a very successful program. It's kind of amazing that there's not more notoriety for it out there, not more knowledge from it out there. But based on all these sort of different solutions, different contributions we've seen from different countries on how to deal with this epidemic, this real health problem of drug addiction, what do you think in your mind is the ideal solution? Is it across the board decriminalization of drugs, which is really more, in my mind, more of a market-based solution, allowing the market to put mechanisms in place to regulate these drugs? Or would you be in favor of more of a legalization? When I think of legalization, I think of it being handed over to the state to control. Maybe in the U.S., maybe the FDA would be involved, the Food and Drug Administration. Which do you think is the ideal path forward for ending drug prohibition?
Well, decriminalisation in the style of Portugal is a great first step, because we shouldn't be sending anyone to prison for taking drugs. So that's the simple way of looking at that. So that's a great move. But the trouble is with decriminalisation is it doesn't take the power away from organised crime. And this is an aspect that isn't talked about enough, is the corrupting power of organised crime as a result of the black market. I've mentioned my sort of The Departed style undercover gangster, and the amount of corruption that is out there is incredible. And if people want to know, we're very smug in our stable democracies, like in the United States and the UK, and we think it's never going to go that far. But corruption is increasing, and if we want to know how far it can go, then we just need to look at the transit or production countries, and you look at Mexico. The deaths in Mexico every week are just incredible. There's often more deaths in Mexico than there are in Syria. So we need to be thinking about the corruption, and only regulation will do that. Now, the trouble is that the L word, the legalization word, is actually a problem in framing, because it scares people. It brings to mind of what people think of as a free-for-all. Well, it should be seen as the opposite of that. It's a free-for-all now. Drugs are out of control, and we need to get them under control because they can be dangerous. Our organisation, LEAP, we're ex-law enforcement. We're about control. We're about getting to grips with these problems. So the best thing to do is to see it in small policy packages. Break down each drug and each of the problems, because they all have different problems. Break them down into policy decisions. The obvious first one to do is heroin. Prescribing heroin rescues vulnerable people from exploitation. It reduces crime, I mean, in Switzerland, they reduced burglaries in half. They don't even have, they have virtually no street prostitution in Switzerland since they brought in heroin-assisted treatment.
To ask a question quickly on Switzerland. So does Switzerland have fully legal heroin now, or what's the situation over there?
To get onto heroin-assisted treatment in Switzerland, you have to have failed 2 previous treatment options. So from my point of view, that's not perfect, because if you prescribe heroin to someone who's vulnerable, you rescue them. So that could be done earlier. But they've still had a very successful situation. They prescribe. So the most problematic 20% of people on heroin are prescribed heroin. And it saves people's lives. And it's incredibly successful in aiding them to recovery as well. In Switzerland, they also, I'm not sure if everyone realises this, but they also have high street, drug testing. So if you buy a pill of MDMA, you want to know what's in it, or you buy 10, you're going to have them for the weekend. You take 1 pill to this place on Wednesday, and they'll let you know exactly what's in it and what the purity is and strength is by Friday. So in Switzerland, they just don't have MDMA deaths. They just don't have them. So it's all about having a health-based approach. But again, that's not perfect because it's still criminal selling them. So, as you say, if you have the FDA, someone who has a carefully regulated system to say exactly what's in any dose, it's pure, people know exactly what they're buying, then you can have education around it, because unless you know exactly what's in a drug, you can't have education about it, can you? You can't have education without regulation.
Yeah, I guess what I worry about with maybe the FDA or some of these government agencies getting involved is, I can't speak to the UK, but I know in the United States there's a lot of corruption at all levels of government, but especially in pharmaceutical drugs. And there's certain drugs will get approval, certain drugs won't, and there's a lot of money involved. And I don't really think it's beneficial for the FDA to be deciding 100% which types of drugs can be used, which can't. And I think that even the FDA's involvement sort of can lead to cartels' involvement in the black market still going around what is rubber stamped to be approved for consumption. So I mean, it's definitely, I think it would be better than the situation today for sure if we had some form of government oversight, a government regulated drug trade. But I don't think it's ideal.
No, I mean, but maybe we need to be. I don't know the system over there as well as over here, so it's difficult for me to comment on the FDA. And I know you have far bigger difficulties with pharmaceutical drugs and the because you have such a sort of free market way of doing healthcare. I mean, it's drastically different if we just don't have those problems. So. But we need to be inventive. We need to be creating perhaps a new regulatory body, and we need to be separating, or even individual regulatory bodies for each different commodity, because each different commodity has such different problems. I mean, for example, we would never go for the style in the UK. We'd never go for the style of cannabis regulation that you have there, because for here you couldn't sell it to the public. It being based on tax, we can only sell it as being to protect children and to protect children from organised crime, as in the sort of the framing that the Canadians are doing. So each nation has its different framing requirements. Yeah, well,
I think that could work here. I think it's only been sold as it's worked in several states. Cannabis being sold as a tax revenue generator, but I think it could be sold as a way to make our cities more safer, protect our children. I think that could work here, and maybe that's a way that advocates like myself and many people out there listening need to sort of switch our course, because I don't think it's the most beneficial in the long run. If we just start channeling the profits from this into government, but anyway.
No, absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. It is a child protection issue, and there's no getting around that. Our children are at risk because of drug policy at the moment. So we need to make it clear that it is a child protection issue.
100% agree with you. I really want to thank you for coming on the show, Neil. This was really educational for me, learning what the drug trade is like in the UK and learning about your past. Some very interesting and entertaining stories. I know at the time they probably, in fact, they definitely were not entertaining for you, pretty terrifying. And I give you a lot of credit for experiencing all that stuff and coming through, understanding the problems with the system, and now being an advocate, speaking out against it. I think that is that's incredible, that's courageous, and I want to applaud you for that. Before I let you go, could you just let my audience know where they can learn more about UK Leap, where they can learn more about you, and maybe any other projects that you're working on?
Yes, so Leap UK has a website, which is www.ukleap.org. We also have a monthly podcast, which is, we have some fascinating people on there, which is the Stop and Search podcast, which you can hear on Acast. I have a book out, which has just actually been optioned for drama by World Productions. So look out for that. But if you're interested in the book, it's available on Amazon, and it's called Good Cop, Bad War.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Neil. We'll link to the podcast. We'll link to the book. We'll link to UK Leap on the show notes page. Just want to thank you once again for coming on Felony Friday.
Thank you very much, John.
Hey, guys, I hope you enjoyed listening to that interview as much as I enjoyed interviewing Neil Woods, a really cool guy. And Felony Friday is going global, baby. That was our first interview from the other side of the pond. Pretty awesome. It was great to speak with Neil Woods. I think he, like I said in the intro, he's a great spokesman for liberty, does a great job of breaking down how drug prohibition creates an environment where violence can thrive and gangs can use force and violence to prey on the weak in society. And the more we prohibit, the more that we push these drugs into the back alleys of society, the more violent it gets. I just have 3 things to ask you before I let you go today. The first thing is easy. Join the Lions of Liberty Forum. If you haven't joined yet, why? Why haven't you joined? It's the place where I go to talk about liberty. It's a place where all my fellow Lions of Liberty go to talk about liberty. There's a great conversation every single day. You know, I get a lot of my libertarian news there. I get a lot of my ideas for this show right in the Lions of Liberty Forum. And you can join by going to Facebook, punching Lions of Liberty Forum in the search bar at the top and joining. It is that easy. Second, please subscribe to this show, guys. Please subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever podcasting app you want to. It's your choice. I don't care how you listen to the podcast. I just want you to listen, and I want you to share the show. And I don't want you to miss an episode. And I especially don't want you to miss Monday's episode, because it is awesome. I'm not going to lie. It's going to be myself and Mark Claire on an episode of Libertarians in Living Rooms Drinking Liquor. And we have 2 special guests. I'm going to keep it a mystery. I don't want to spoil the surprise. 2 special guests from some libertarian podcasts that you are probably familiar with, that are friends of our show. It was a blast to record it, and I'm looking forward to you guys hearing it. The third thing, guys, is we deliver 3 shows per week, every week, for free. We don't charge you for them, which is fine, which is great. Not trying to charge you for these 3 shows we do for a week, every Monday with Mark Claire, Wednesday with Brian McWilliams, and Friday with myself on Felony Friday. But in order for us to really grow this podcast, to reach a wider audience and take this to the level that we want to and make the impact that we want to in the liberty movement, we need money. We need funds. We need to advertise. We need to be able to reach out and spread awareness about this show. And the only way to do that is with money. The vehicle that we've created to help us fund that is our Lions Pride. And guys, for just $5 a month, you can join the Lions Pride. You're going to get discounts in our Lions of Liberty store. You're going to get access to all of our bonus content. Everything from extra episodes. We've had some conspiracy theory roundtables. We had an episode last week with myself and Brian McWilliams and Rico, where we broke down the joke of the 100 top libertarian influencers list. So we're always having new content like that. I released this episode of Felony Friday actually on Tuesday to our Lions Pride group, so they got to hear it early. And we've bonuses like that every single week. You can join for more. You can give us some more money to help us to an even larger extent. And because of that, we'll reward you more. So for $10, you'll get some free stuff. You get a free shirt. For $25, you get access to us. You'll get a conference call with us every month. You can give us ideas. You can really influence the show, and you get our ear for more than an hour probably every month. So it's a pretty cool perk. And I said I had 3 things to talk about, but I lied. There's a 4th thing. And this is very important. You've heard Mark Claire talk about this on the Monday show. But guys, I want to remind you about the effort that we are collaborating with a couple other libertarian podcasts and with the app Donor C. Mark Claire, of course, interviewed the founder of Donor C, Gret Glyer, back in episode 289 of Lions of Liberty. And you can find that at lionsofliberty.com/289 to find out all about Donor C. And if you don't know about it, it's an app. You can also go on the website, donorc.com. You can download the app to your phone. It makes it very easy to fund specific projects all across the world to help people who are really in need. And one thing we've done here at Lions of Liberty is we've banded together with a couple other libertarian podcasts, libertarian groups, and a member of our Lions of Liberty forum, Mr. Clint Rankin, has put together a Facebook group, a Facebook page. He has a website called Walk the Walk. And the idea behind it is, as libertarians, we talk about all the time that charity is more powerful than government, that consent and voluntary contribution is more powerful than coercion. So now it's time to back it up. Now it's time to walk the walk, and that's what we're doing with this project that we're focusing on. It's a project where a woman in Kenya by the name of Esther, who has HIV, this project is raising money. It's to pay for her HIV medication, and it's to help train her to actually run a chicken farm. And then in turn, also, she's going to act as a mother to some orphans in the area. So it's a very libertarian type deal. She's going to be working, and she's going to be helping also in the community, helping these orphans. So it's a great cause, and it is so close to being funded, guys. As I'm saying this right now, it's $239 away. And it started out, the total needing funded was $1,500. So we are really, really close, guys. And I want to ask you to please go donate. If there's anything that you do today, if you spend any money at all, if you go buy a cup of coffee, if you get a cheeseburger, think about how much money you're spending there. You get coffee, maybe you're spending, I don't know, $3. You get a cheeseburger and fries at Wendy's or something, spending $5, $6, $7. Just go to Donor C, give $1. Give Esther $1. Give her $2. It makes a difference, guys. This is a revolutionary way to change charity, and we're behind it, and we're going to continue to back causes like this. Well, that's it, guys. In the interest of keeping my voice, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for listening today. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.